Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Nate. Today I wanted to do a very quick wrap up for what I read in November. In November I read 8 books, some I listened to, some I physically read, and then I read like 21 volumes of manga. I was doing a manga readathon challenge thing where I was supposed to read 25 volumes, which I did technically read 25 individual volumes. I had 4 manga that were omnibuses. In my announcement video I was like, I'm gonna read them all, read the whole volume. I didn't. I read the first volume of each of them, so I did actually read 25 volumes, but because the volumes are bound up, I didn't technically read all of what I said I was going to. I set myself a bit too high on that ambition. I'm going to try and keep it short and sweet, which I tend to ramble, so let's see how that goes. The first book I read in the month was carried over from October, and that was Released by Patrick Ness. I actually made a short about this video, so I won't go too much into it. It's a weird story, and I'm not sure how much I thought about it. I think I rated it 3 stars. It's a story of a young boy called Adam, and he just a kind of day journey. He is queer, and it's the kind of going away day of someone he used to love, someone he was in a relationship, and it's just kind of about his life. He's in a very Christian family, and he finds out people in his real life, you know, are leaving him, and he has issues at work. And then there's also this other plot line of a girl who was murdered 2 weeks ago in their village. She was drowned, and her like body comes out of the water, kind of inhibited by some kind of weird spirit, and is going on a journey to find release, I guess, in form of, I guess, you know, fulfillment for something that happened in her life. It was weird. I think the crossover of those 2 storylines was odd, and I didn't particularly enjoy it. I do think Patrick Ness's writing style is extremely easy to read, and which is kind of why I rated it a 3 star, because it was easy to read, and I did enjoy Adam's storyline. I just found the other storyline very odd and an odd mix. I've read a few Patrick Ness now. Some I like more than others, and I do find his writing style really interesting, and also the kind of topics he talks about quite interesting. He does talk about, I've read a couple of things that he has where he talks about sexuality, which I enjoy reading about, and in different ways as well. And this is from a kind of very Catholic, Christian, religious American family, where I've read Difference from Boys by him, which is about an English teenager. So I like reading different stories by him. But yeah, this one wasn't really a hit for me. I did end up listening to some of this as well, which helped me get through it very quickly. It is just under 300 pages, so it's not a long commitment. But yeah, I just think the addition of this other storyline was a bit weird for me, and I didn't particularly enjoy that section. I liked the other section, but that section kind of just, yeah, felt odd. After that, I read a book that was on my TBR for the month, and that was the second half of The Final Empire. I had already read half of this, so I was just finishing off this book in the month, and I ended up really enjoying this. This was a 4 star for me. I think the conclusion of everything kind of coming together, the kind of big build-up that we had for the first section, and how all the storylines kind of tied themselves up. There were definitely some surprises in this that I didn't see coming, with how some storylines ended and how some characters kind of their journeys went. But overall, I really enjoyed this. In my 24-hour reading vlog, I did mention I didn't find this book extremely like gripping, but I did find it kind of steadily enjoyable. I really liked all of our characters in it. I think Vin especially was a great main character, and seeing kind of her struggles and her development and some of the reveals you get with her character later on in the book, I just found really enjoyable. So yeah, I really liked this. I'm not going to say much more about it because I did speak about it quite a bit in my 24-hour reading vlog, but yeah, this is something I'm looking forward to continuing next year, this series. Also in that 24-hour reading vlog, I spoke about XOXO by Christina Lee. I mentioned in that vlog, I didn't particularly enjoy this. It wasn't that it was bad, it was just very simple. I mentioned it felt quite young, but had explicit sexual content, so why it was labeled as an adult book, even though like the writing and some of the drama and like the stuff that was happening felt very young, especially with like friend drama. And I sometimes don't know if this is also a difference in perspective of going to a university in the UK as opposed to going to university in America, because in this book there's a lot of involvement in the universities with like parents. Like one of our characters has a rich family who has investment in his university, and so the guy's family like fund the university, so like they end up knowing a lot of stuff that he's doing. And then they also had a parents' day, which is not something you get in the UK at all. The moment you're at university, you're an adult, your parents have nothing to do with you. Your parents can't even legally call up the university and ask about you being even a student there without your consent, because that goes against data protection. So the idea that there was a parents' day in this university was really weird for me. So yeah, there were just things like that, and like it was fine. It was a very short read, it was very quick, very simple writing, very easy to read, but it was just very average of like a romance and a story, and I did read it and it was fine. I wouldn't necessarily be in a rush to read anything else by this author, but I also would never say never, because maybe in the future I will really like one of her books. Like I said, I also spoke about this a bit more in that reading vlog, as well as the next book, which was an audiobook that I listened to, which was Shatter by Tahira Murphy. I hear a lot of people talk really good things about this book, and it was okay. I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it. I think XOXO I'd give a 2 star, and I think Shatter I'd give a 3 star, but it would be kind of quite just a borderline like higher 2, lower 3. It's a dystopian, which I don't think it was set out very well to be a dystopian, in that you didn't really get any of the atmosphere of this dystopian world. Our main character at the beginning of the book is in jail for reasons, and so when the world has kind of gone to shit, she hasn't really seen it. She's just, I think, kind of heard about it, or it was happening just before she got sent into jail. So the only scenes that you get as the reader are her being in jail, and then she ends up getting taken out of there and going to live in like this mansion. So you don't actually see any of this dystopian world that's going on around till a little bit later on in the book. And even then, I don't think it's fleshed out very well. This also feels a much more romance book than like anything else, which I wasn't expecting. I was expecting it to be a bit more maybe actiony. I did also think this was a fantasy, which it isn't. That was just my mistake. So I was expecting it to have fantasy elements, which it didn't. It does have an element of our main character has a power. So I don't know where the rest of the series is going to go. And I think there's 6 books in the series, but I think the original trilogy was set up to be like a standalone trilogy, and then it got added to. So I do have the audiobook reserved for my library, so I will listen to the next one, but I didn't love it. And I think I did enjoy more towards the end, when you start to meet new characters and kind of get the idea of a rebellion that's going to be happening in this dystopian, which I guess is kind of typical. So that was a bit more interesting. So I will listen to the next one to kind of decide if I'm interested in carrying on the series. But if I might just listen to the original 3, because I was listening to the audiobook. It has like scratches in the audiobook sound, where obviously the character is scratching out stuff, and I liked that they carried that over, because that's obviously something you visually wouldn't get if you're not reading the book. So they did have sections where I'm guessing she would say something and then scratch it out in her head, and it did include that. That's just like an audiobook tidbit, but I did enjoy that they carried that over. And then another audiobook that I listened to, I really got into audiobooks in November, was How to Betray a Dragon's Trust, I think it's called, which is the 11th book in the How to Train Dragon series. This book was a 5-star for me. It was the first 5-star I've given in this series. The series has been quite solidly like 3.5-4 stars for me, but this book was so good. I think the character development in this book for a particular character was just something that I didn't really expect to happen, but was just done so well. And it had a really nice moral conversation in this book that I feel like was so mature for a middle grade series, and it really took me back. And yeah, I just really enjoyed this. The whole of the last 2 books are set out so they take place over 48 hours. I haven't read the last book yet, but like it explains that at the beginning of the 11th book. So it was very, very fast paced, and so much happened. And so I'm very excited of finishing this series, because it's just really built up now for this last book to be like a big heavy hitter. I'm obviously not going to say much more about it because it is the 11th book, which is like a big commitment to like spoil anything about. But yeah, I just think the writing in this particular book was so good. And as always, David Tennant's narration for this audiobook was just fantastic. So yeah, really, really enjoyed that. That was my my only 5-star read in terms of books for the month. And then from like my highest probably to my lowest, and that was Nick and Charlie by Alice Oseman. I did not enjoy this book. I think I gave it a 2-star. This is my first time reading anything Alice Oseman's written outside of her graphic novels, and I didn't particularly enjoy her writing in this. It was so, well, it was easy enough to read actually. It was very, very basic writing. Like it was very, very simplistic. I think this whole book took me like an hour to read, and it's 150 pages, which for me is very, very quick. It's not very like, the pages aren't exactly like crammed. So that's, but yeah, it was just such, it was a very quick read. And so for that, I didn't mind, but for the actual content and the kind of writing, I didn't like. This is set when Nick is just about to, he's 18, so he's going off to university, and it's in their summer, so it does, I guess, spoil some of the stuff that happens later on in the graphic novels that I've not actually read yet, but like I'm not that invested in the series. Like I assumed they were going to end up together or stay together or whatever. And yeah, I just think Charlie's extremely selfish, and I think he has some slight awareness that he's being selfish, but doesn't actually correct his actions in any way. And I just think the way he was treating Nick in this was not very nice, and really selfish and self-centered, and like just really disrespectful. And yeah, I just kind of, this made me not like Charlie. I really, really like Nick, which does combat that, but I think Charlie's quite selfish, and yeah, for that reason I didn't enjoy this. I also didn't particularly enjoy her writing. No, I didn't not enjoy it, but it was very, it didn't really give me anything like that, like oomph. It was just very simple and basic and quite plain. I do also think there is this element of her wanting to act like, this is gonna sound horrible, but they're like this unique couple. Like this whole thing in this is like, but you're Nick and Charlie, you're like, you're I guess the exception to like the rule, you know, like this that kind of idea. And I hate that. I hate that in books when it's like you're just like you're like this unique special couple. What are you talking about? Because they're just people at the end of the day. Like it's not like you're in like a fantasy world where you're like soulmates and stuff like that. You're just people. And I didn't love that. I didn't love this element of, you know, you two are so you're gonna beat the odds, you're gonna stay together, you're all of this. I don't know, this book just felt really throwaway, I guess. I do know that this, I think this was self-published and then like traditionally published. I don't know 100% just because I was just looking at the front, and I think it was originally written in 2015, so Alice Oseman's writing probably has improved since then, so I would maybe read some of her later stuff, but I'm not really interested in reading any of her earlier stuff. That it was maybe around this time, it just wasn't really for me. I did really like though that there was cute illustrations throughout the book. There's some little illustrations there, and like, yeah, So I did like the inclusion of some illustrations. But yeah, overall, this book wasn't really for me. That book was on my TBR, and then I read a book that was not on my TBR, and that is Little Women by Louise May Alcott. This book is a book that I read for a reading vlog that I did, which was the Little Women Readathon reading vlog. This is my first time reading Little Women, and this, I did not realize when I picked this up, is only like part one, I guess, that sometimes this book is published in two parts, Little Women and Good Wives. I have one that is published like that, so I didn't know that when I started it, because I thought this is a tiny book, I'll breeze through this. I did end up listening to it. I didn't actually even read this, I listened to it, and I will do that for Good Wives in the future. This book for me, it was fine. It was a 3-star. I did really like the 2019, I think it was 2019, movie by Greta Gerwig, but after reading this, I do sometimes question her choice of having the actors play themselves throughout the movie. Not necessarily all of them, but in particular Florence Pugh, because Florence Pugh is supposed to be like 12, and I think when I watched the movie, I get that she was supposed to be acting younger, but I didn't get she was supposed to be trying to be 12, because she doesn't look 12. Why have someone that's like 20, or however old she was at the time, pretend to be 12? Because then it did, when I was watching the movie, really make her seem extremely immature and childish, which she's supposed to be because she's 12, but because she doesn't look 12, it felt like she was just really immature. Whereas like when I read this, I didn't feel that way about Amy at all, because Amy's 12 and she comes off like 12. Yeah, this is okay. Like, there were some chapters in it that I just felt were really random and didn't really add anything to the story. And I do sometimes think I struggle sometimes with classics like this when I feel like they're not really, well, it's the kind of the story, their everyday lives, just like them being little women in this like little place. So it doesn't really have much in terms of like stakes, I guess. And that sometimes with classics, I'm always a bit like, what's the point? In like, not a bad way, but like, what are we going towards? But obviously there are stuff that happens in this. I always find it funny when they're like, obviously talking about them being poor and all of this stuff, which they do work. And so I think in this time for being women and working, you know, they are of less means, but they're obviously not what I would consider poor. They have a housekeeper or a maid or someone that lives with them. And, you know, they are able to like go to like parties and stuff. Yeah. I do also think it was interesting. This was my first like American classic that I think I've read, I'm pretty sure. So seeing kind of the differences in like a 1700s, 1800 English classic novel and then like an 1800 American classic novel was quite interesting. I think writing wise, it was very easy. It would have been easy for me to read. I am glad I listened to it because I thought, why not? And most of the classics I've read, I've listened to because I just find I process them a bit easier than if I read them. But yeah, I just think overall it was kind of average. I also don't, which again, obviously it's of its time, so it would speak about women like that, but I don't love the kind of putting women in boxes. But I do understand, obviously in this time that was the norm, and actually this for this time was probably quite progressive, especially with Jo's character of being quite a outgoing, she doesn't want to, you know, doesn't want to be girly, she doesn't like romance, she doesn't want to do this. So I think that probably was quite actually, yeah, forward for its time. But obviously looking back on it from a perspective of like 200 years later, maybe was this written around the early 1800s? Yeah, like almost 200 years later, it has like 150 years later, it does obviously in retrospect not quite fit the same, but that's no fault on like the book itself. That's just kind of a perspective of me, my enjoyment of it now, if that makes sense. I will at some point listen to Good Wives. I was listening to them on Spotify, so I will listen to it, but I'm not in a huge rush. This was fine. And I'm glad I did it and enjoyed it for the readathon, but I think I probably, if I was ever going to consume this again, I would probably just watch the movie because I did really enjoy the movie. So I would probably just do that. And then the last book that I read, I don't have with me though at the moment because my sister is reading it, and that is Killers of a Certain Age by Deanne Raybourn, I think. This is a story about older women assassins who are retiring, and as they are on their retirement cruise, realize that their old agency has basically put a hit on them, and their journey to figuring out why, and then kind of like trying to take down their agency to get their independence. Overall, I enjoyed this book. I gave it, I think, 3 or 3.5 stars. I can't quite remember. It would be 3 on my Goodreads, but it might have been a 3.5. I think I liked the idea of this story a lot more than I necessarily liked its execution. I think it did certain things nice, but I, for one, never really felt much stakes. I kind of never really questioned that not everything was going to turn out okay. It always felt like things just went okay, and it was quite easy in that sense. I also don't think these women came across like 60-year-old women. I think they came across like 20-year-old women. I don't think they were written to be like 60-year-old women. And that's not to say that, you know, 60-year-old women have to sound and act a certain way, but like they felt very young to what I think they were supposed to be, and so that was a bit like throwing me off. I did end up listening to some of this as well, and I do think the audiobook narrator helped them seem a bit older, which I liked, but from reading it, I did not read them as 60-year-old women, to the point where I was reading it and I was trying to work in my head, how old they were supposed to be, because I was like, they don't sound like this is the age where they're retiring. And then like sometimes they would just talk about like the menopause or like some hips hurting and stuff like that. It did not read to me like 60-year-old women would be reading, or even like just older women. I have older women in my life that I interact with, obviously, and they did not read like that. They kind of much more read like 20-something women, which I think is one of my biggest criticisms of the book. The book is split as well into different POV slots, in that it has their current day, which is done in the first person perspective, and then it does have flashbacks to like older cases from like the 80s, and that's done in the third person perspective, but we always see it through the same character. So our main character is Billy, so from her first person perspective, it's just, you know, but it's from Billy. But then the third person perspective is also from Billy's point of view, but just using Billy instead. And I thought that was an odd choice. I guess it was done to break up the nowadays stuff and the past stuff, but it just felt like an odd shift when there wasn't really any need for it if we are still just following the same character, because we were. And there were like a twist, I guess, maybe, or like at the end that I guessed wasn't very surprising. I don't know if it was supposed to be surprising. I don't know if it was meant to be like a shock, you know, third act reveal. But it wasn't. So it might not have been necessarily, but yeah, I kind of guessed where it was going to go, and it went that exact way. In theory, I really like the idea of this book, and I did enjoy some of the characters, and I liked that all four of the main characters did have quite distinct personalities in like their motivation for becoming assassins, the kind of assassins that they were, and then as older women, they did read differently, and I could tell kind of who they were. But yeah, I didn't think there was much stakes going on. I didn't ever really kind of worry that things were going to go bad, and things just seemed to be quite easy for the main characters. So yeah, it was okay. Like I said, I liked the idea probably more than the execution. So that was the last physical book I read. Like I said, I read 21 volumes of manga, individual volumes, and then I did also read the 4 ones that were in the omnibuses. So I did technically complete my bingo, but I didn't read the whole of the omnibuses. I'm going to finish them up in the month, beginning of December. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching this video. I will see you again hopefully soon. Bye.